I still remember the sound of the rain hitting the window of the house in Atlanta that day. I was only 12, but the sound of my parents' fight was louder than any thunder. The words cut through the air like invisible knives, and each scream seemed to rip out a piece of our home, and my heart. It was that night that I swore to myself that I would never experience a love like that. My mother cried softly in the kitchen, washing the same cup for almost an hour. My father had left, slamming the door so hard that the hallway mirror cracked. I stared at that crack and thought, is this how love ends? Broken and ugly, beyond repair. My promise was born there. I would be different. I would be the perfect wife. Before I continue, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, for we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, for His love is eternal and infinite. I also take this opportunity to ask that you like the video and subscribe to the channel. This helps me a lot, thank you. Growing up with the memory of a home in ruins shapes you in strange ways. We learn to hide the pain behind polite smiles and neatly arranged plates on the table. My mother always said, a good man is one who doesn't leave. And I grew up believing that, thinking that love was about staying, not about being happy. But even in that confused childhood, something inside me burned with stubborn hope. I looked at the families in the churches of Decathlon. I wondered how they made it look so easy. They smiled in a way that seemed genuine. I just wanted that. Peace. A home where no one was afraid to speak up. When I turned 15, I started keeping a diary. In it, I promised myself I would be strong, patient, and loyal. I will never allow my husband to yell at me like Dad yelled at Mom, I wrote in crooked letters. I believed, with all the naivete in the world, that promises were enough to change fate. But the truth is, promises made with a wounded heart are fragile. They crack at the first breath of life. I didn't know that yet. I only knew that I wanted to love and be loved, without pain, without shouting, without long, heavy silences at dinner. I used to imagine myself in a white veil, walking through a lit-up church, with my father smiling in the background. Ironic, isn't it? The same man who destroyed my mother's love was the character in my childhood dream. But that's how the mind works when it's still searching for healing. I remember the night I saw my mother for the last time before leaving home. She was on the porch, smoking silently, and she said to me, "Emmy, don't lose yourself trying to be something you're not. Love isn't a cross to bear alone." I didn't quite understand. I only realized the weight of those words many years later. Deep down, my promise wasn't just about marriage. It was about redemption. I wanted to prove to myself that it was possible to break the cycle, that blood didn't determine destiny. I wanted to look back and say, I did it. But between wanting and living, there's an abyss. And it was into this abyss that I ended up slipping, slowly, without realizing it. Because love, love, sometimes arrives disguised as a promise too. I met Ryan at a summer fair in Stone Mountain. He had that easy smile and a way of looking at me that made me forget everything. He was kind, funny, and seemed to see in me what no one else saw. The wounded girl in me believed he was the answer to my prayers. We started talking every day, and within a few weeks I was writing his name in my journal, surrounded by drawn hearts. He made me feel safe, like nothing could hurt me as long as I was with him. And that's when the promise began to change shape. I no longer said, I want to be the perfect wife. I said, I want to be his wife. And that simple change was the beginning of something much bigger than I could have imagined. My mother was suspicious. "Girl, you're still a child," she'd say. But I didn't want to hear it. A 16-year-old's heart doesn't understand caution. It understands urgency. I remember the first time Ryan took me to his church in Lawrenceville. He held my hand during prayer and I thought, this is it. God has finally heard me. I was so sure it was true love that I ignored all the signs heaven was sending me. The little lies, the postponed promises, the way he spoke louder when he wanted to be right. It all seemed so small compared to the brilliance of our beginning. I thought I could fix anything with patience. That if I loved enough, everything would fall into place. As if love were a divine mortar capable of healing deep cracks. But love, when it's fear in disguise, tastes like silence. And I was about to taste that flavor for many years. Sometimes I wonder if God was trying to warn me. If on that rainy night when I promised to be the good wife, he sighed, knowing it would take me decades to understand what that truly meant. I believed that keeping my promise was an act of faith. But deep down, it was an act of guilt. I thought that if I were perfect, no one would leave. My high school friends talked about college, dreams, and travel. I talked about weddings, dresses, what it would be like to have a house with white curtains and the scent of vanilla cake. If I could go back in time, I would hug that girl and say, "You don't have to prove anything to anyone." But at the time, all I knew was how to chase what my mother never had: stability. When Ryan proposed to me one autumn evening, kneeling on the porch with a cheap ring and a shy smile, I cried. Not from fear, but from relief. It was as if, finally, the chaos had ended. I said, yes, without hesitation. Without thinking about old promises. Without listening to my mother's warnings. I just wanted to believe that love was enough. And that night, as I lay staring at the ceiling in my bedroom, I repeated the sentence I had written so many years before. I will be the good wife. Only this time, it sounded different. It sounded like a sentence. Little did I know that what seemed like a dream was about to turn into my first nightmare. And that the promise I made to myself would become the prison of my own soul. Because sometimes, hell begins with a good intention. And my story, well, it was just beginning. I can still smell the wilted flowers in the community hall where I got married. The dress was simple, borrowed from Ryan's cousin, and the bouquet was a handful of daisies picked from the backyard. I was only 16, but I felt grown up, ready to love, to care, to start a new life. People looked at us tenderly, like someone watching a cheap fairy tale. So young and they already know what they want from life, they said. I smiled, unaware that what I really wanted was to feel safe. Ryan looked at me with a sparkle in his eyes that made me believe love was enough. That night, when he held my hand and promised he'd never leave me alone, I believed him wholeheartedly. "You're mine forever, Emmy," he said. And forever felt like a blessing. Little did I know it would one day sound like a threat. For the first few months, everything seemed perfect. We laughed over anything, cooked together, made plans, and daydreamed. I saw my mother every now and then, and she always looked at me with a strange silence. Now I understand. It was fear disguised as hope. Ryan got a job at a gas station, and I started cleaning houses around Marietta. We worked hard, but we believed it was the beginning of something great. The simple life had its own charm. And I, so young, thought every sacrifice was a proof of love. When I found out I was pregnant with Jake, I cried with joy. Ryan hugged me tightly and said our family would be unlike anything else. In that moment, I forgot about my exhaustion, my fear, and the uncertain future. I just thought, now I'm complete. But motherhood came too quickly. While my friends went out partying, I spent sleepless nights trying to get the baby to sleep. Sometimes I'd look in the mirror and barely recognize the girl reflected there. So young, and already with so much weight on her shoulders. Ryan seemed distant, tired. He worked long hours and would come home irritated, complaining about life. I tried not to bother him, to serve him a hot dinner, to smile even when I didn't want to. I thought that was what good wives did. Soon after came the Lily, our second daughter. And suddenly, there were 4 of us. Me, Ryan, Jake, and that little being who slept with her hands clasped together, as if holding the world. I felt blessed, even with the chaos. There were days when anything seemed possible. Jake laughing in the living room, Lily babbling, Ryan telling jokes. I believed that love could weather any storm. After all, my promise still echoed within me, to keep the family together, no matter the cost. But the cost, I didn't know yet, would be too high. The long silences and the cross glances began. Ryan no longer kissed me when he left for work. The conversations diminished. And when I asked what was wrong, he just said, "Nothing, you talk too much." It was during this time that I learned the power of swallowing my words. Of smiling even when everything inside me screamed. Of saying, "It's okay," just to avoid another argument. The dreamy 16-year-old girl began to disappear, and in her place emerged someone who lived in fear of making mistakes. On Sundays, I took the kids to church alone. Ryan said he needed to rest. And while the choir sang Amazing Grace, I closed my eyes and asked God to show me the way. But he seemed silent, as if waiting for me to learn something I didn't yet understand. I remember the first time I felt alone even though I was married. I was washing the dishes, with Jake playing on the floor and Lily sleeping in her crib. I looked at the ring on my finger and asked myself, is this love or fear of being alone? The older neighbors said that marriage is really hard, that every woman needs to endure a little. I smiled, pretending to agree, but inside something hurt. I just didn't know how to name that pain. As the years passed, the house became filled with toys, children's laughter, and silent secrets. Ryan started going out more, working late. I believed. I wanted to believe. Because facing the truth hurt more than the comfortable lie. With each new dawn alone, I convinced myself that things would get better. It's just a phase, I told myself. The problem is, some phases don't pass, they become routine. Sometimes Jake would ask, "Mommy, does Daddy still love us?" And I would answer with a smile, even though my heart was heavy, "Of course I do, honey." But inside, my faith in love was beginning to fray like old fabric. Still, I didn't give up. I kept cooking, praying, believing. I thought faith was synonymous with endurance. That love meant enduring. But enduring is not the same as living. And little by little I stopped living. One night, Ryan came home drunk, laughing loudly, and knocked a glass into the sink. When I went to help him, he yelled at me, calling me useless. It was the first time I'd seen him with that blank look. I should have been scared, but I felt sorry. The next day, he apologized. He brought me cheap flowers and said he was stressed. I hugged him, crying, believing it wouldn't happen again. But deep down, a part of me knew something had changed. That the man who once held my hand, promising eternal love, was beginning to fade away. I was only 20 years old, with 2 children and a whole life ahead of me. But I felt old, tired, and empty of myself. Little by little, I realized that my promise to keep my family together was trapping me in a cycle of pain. And, ironically, it was the very cycle I had sworn to break. Sometimes, when I put Jake and Lily to bed, I would look at them and whisper, "Mommy will protect you, no matter what." I didn't know how, but I knew that one day I would have to do it. I just didn't imagine that the beginning of this change would come with something as simple, and as devastating, as first slap. The change to Dallas, it felt like the beginning of a new opportunity. Ryan got a better job, and I prayed that this would be the turning point in our lives. The house was simple but beautiful, with a white porch and a small garden that I tended every day. I thought that perhaps the distance from the past could heal us. For a while, it seemed like it was working. The kids laughed more, Ryan came home with stories from work, and I allowed myself to believe again. To believe that love could be reborn even after the storms. But like all calm, this one also hid an omen. I felt, deep down, a tension in the air, something invisible but constant, like the sound of a clock that never stops. And time, relentless, counted down to the moment when everything would change. It was a Friday afternoon. Jake had gone to play at the neighbor's house, and Lily, just 2 years old, was drawing with chalk on the kitchen floor. I was making dinner, and Ryan came in, angry, talking loudly on the phone. He didn't even look at me. I asked if everything was okay, and he replied curtly, "Could you just, for once, not bother me?" I remained silent. My heart raced, but I tried to remain calm. I simply said, "I just asked." And that's when the sound came. The crack echoed through the kitchen. The first slap. Quick, hard, cold. For a second, time stood still. The smell of rice burning on the stove, the colored chalk in Lily's hands, the wind whipping the curtain, everything was suspended. I brought my hand to my face and felt the heat spread. He glared at me, his eyes filled with rage, as if I were the enemy. And then, without a word, he turned and went to his room. Lily stared at me silently. Her confused little eyes seemed to ask what had happened. I knelt down, hugged her and said, "It's okay, my love. It's okay." But it wasn't. Nothing was. When Ryan left the house that night, I sat on the floor for hours. My face throbbed, but the worst pain came from within. I asked myself, what did I do wrong? And like so many women, I felt it was my fault. The next day, he came back with flowers. He said he was stressed, that he didn't know what had gotten into him. He cried, begged for forgiveness, and promised it would never happen again. And I believed him. Because love is also about wanting to believe, even when everything screams otherwise. For weeks, I tried to erase that moment from my mind. I cleaned the entire house, moved the furniture around, made excuses for myself. He's overwhelmed. I need to be more patient. Every family goes through ups and downs. But at night, when I lay in bed, the sound of the slap still echoed. It was as if the silence was punishing me, reminding me of what I didn't want to accept. I looked at Lily sleeping and felt a knot in my chest. That scene was etched in her eyes. And deep down, I knew something had been broken, something that would never be the same again. I began to walk silently through the house. Each step measured, each word considered. I learned to read Ryan's mood before he even opened his mouth. I was constantly on high alert, like someone walking on a glass floor. One night, he came home late and asked why I was still awake. I told him I was worried. He replied, "You don't have to worry about me. Just worry about doing what I tell you." The sentence pierced me like a blade. I tried to talk, to tell him I loved him, that I just wanted to understand. But he just smiled, a cold, distant, almost cruel smile. And I knew the man I once loved was no longer there. Even so, I kept pretending. For the children, for the house, for the promise. And each day of pretending was a new nail in the cross I carried myself. My friends asked if everything was okay. I said yes. I used foundation to hide the redness on my face and a smile to hide my fear. In church, during worship, I wept silently. I didn't want anyone to notice. Only God knew what I felt. I prayed for strength, for a sign. And heaven, merciful, gave me only silence, the same silence that precedes great changes. Ryan started arriving later and later. He smelled of perfume that wasn't mine, of cigarettes, and of disdain. When I asked him where he'd been, he'd say, "You're going crazy." And I began to doubt my own mind. I remember the night Jake hugged me and asked, "Mommy, why do you cry when Daddy talks loud?" I didn't know what to say. I just hugged him tightly and said, "Mommy's okay." But that, okay, was the first thing that hurt my throat. That first slap changed everything. Not just my face, but my heart. The hope, the brightness, the faith I had in promises began to melt away, like snow melting in the palm of my hand. I began to dread the sound of the key turning in the lock, the sound of the car in the garage, the smell of his perfume. It was as if every detail of the day carried a new fear. But at the same time, I still loved him. Or maybe I loved the memory of the man he once was. And this, I realized later, is what holds many women back, the love for what no longer exists. I told myself it was an isolated mistake, that he would never do that again, that faith could heal everything. But faith doesn't cure what you pretend not to see. And deep down, I already knew. I knew that slap wouldn't be the last. I knew that what seemed like just a slip-up was actually the first brick in a prison he was building around me. And I still believed that I could love my jailer until he returned to being the man he once promised me he would be. But love, when mixed with fear, is no longer love. It's survival. And it was like that, in silence, that my soul began to fade away, one piece at a time. Until the day he made me believe that leaving home would be impossible. They say the cruelest prison is the one without bars. And that's exactly where I lived, inside a beautiful house, in a quiet neighborhood of Garland, Texas, where neighbors waved and windows hid secrets. It was the perfect prison, invisible to everyone, including myself. After the first slap, Ryan transformed in a subtle, almost imperceptible way. He started with small comments. That outfit is too short. You should stay home more. Those friends of yours don't influence you well. Words that sounded like care but tasted like poison. Over time, he began to decide everything. What I wore, what I ate, who I talked to. If I took too long to answer the phone, he'd ask where I was. If I laughed too much, he'd ask who I was laughing at. And, little by little, the fear became routine. The flowers in the garden died, and I didn't even notice. I began cleaning the house in silence, measuring every step, every breath. Even the sound of the wind in the curtains made me nervous, because anything could irritate him. He began controlling the money. He told me I didn't need to work, that he would take care of everything. But without realizing it, I lost the right to choose. Even what I put on the table was his decision. The grocery card was kept locked in his office drawer. When I asked, he'd say, "Write down what you need, and I'll buy it." And so, even the simple act of buying milk became a favor, not a right. My friends started disappearing from my life. First, because of excuses. I can't today, Ryan's tired. Then, out of fear. What if he gets mad? Until one day, the phone stopped ringing. Loneliness had a sound of its own, the sound of light footsteps in a house too big. I talked to myself, sang softly to the children, and pretended normalcy. Because pretending was safer than confronting. Jake would ask why Dad was always angry. I told him it was work, the stress. But he could see it. Kids always see it. And it tore me apart inside. There were days when Ryan would arrive bearing gifts. Flowers, perfume, sudden kisses. He'd say, "See how much I love you." And for a moment, I believed him. Until the cycle began again. The yelling, the accusations, the control. The mind gets used to pain when there's no way out. I started to believe I deserved it all. That maybe I wasn't good enough. That if I tried harder, he'd be the man he was from the beginning again. But the beginning no longer existed. It was a faded memory, a torn photograph inside me. The neighbors smiled when they saw me sweeping the porch. "You're lucky, Ryan seems so dedicated." I smiled back, a practiced smile, my eyes full of secrets. Sometimes I wondered if anyone noticed. If anyone saw beyond the pretty facade of marriage. But abuse, when invisible, is easy to ignore, especially when the abuser is so good at faking it. Ryan had a way of being kind in public. He helped neighbors, made jokes, took the kids for walks. Everyone admired him. And I was just the silent wife beside him. He said, "You don't need anyone but me." And I, no longer strong enough to argue, simply agreed. The isolation didn't happen all at once. It was a slow poison, dissolved into everyday life. I started writing letters I never sent. Letters to myself. I'd say in them, "One day you'll get out of here." And then I'd cry, tear them up, and throw them away. It was my only act of rebellion. I avoided mirrors. I didn't want to see who I had become. The dreamy girl from Atlanta no longer existed. In her place was a tired woman, with dark circles under her eyes and eyes that seemed to cry for help. At night, I would lie beside him and pretend to sleep. The sound of Ryan breathing beside me would make me tense. Sometimes he would touch me tenderly, and I would wonder, who is this man? My love, or my fear? One night he locked the bedroom door and took the key with him. He said it was to make sure I didn't do anything stupid. I stared at the doorknob for hours, feeling dread growing in my chest. The next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. He made coffee, kissed the kids, and left for work. I sat there at the table, trying to understand how love could turn into prison so quickly. Time lost its meaning. Days, weeks, months. Everything blended together. The house became a broken clock. And yet, I kept praying. I asked God to change his heart, to show me a way. But the answers didn't come, at least, not in the way I expected. I started dreaming about doors. Locked doors, doors that opened and then closed again. Always the same dream. I'd wake up sweating, with my heart racing, thinking the sound of the lock was real. One day, Jake drew a picture of our house. On the paper, he drew a huge fence around it. When I asked what it was, he said, "It's so no one can run away." I froze. It hit me like a mirror. It was then that I realized, my prison wasn't just mine. I was raising my children inside it too. That day, I sat on the living room floor and cried silently. Not out of fear but out of shame. Shame for having lost myself trying to be the good wife I promised myself to be. And it was there on that cold floor that for the first time I thought, maybe God doesn't want me to endure. Maybe he wants me to get up. But before I could get up, I would fall even deeper. Because the hell of an abusive relationship has no apparent bottom. And what would come next? The dark nights, the absolute control, the constant fear, would make that first slap seem like just the beginning of a much larger storm. There was a night when the lights went out. Literally. Ryan cut the electricity because I crossed him. He told me I had to learn to obey. I stood in the dark with Jake and Lily, holding them tight, feeling the fear breathe along with me. The silence was heavy, filled with tears that couldn't fall. I lit an old candle and sat on the floor. Shadows danced on the walls, seeming to mock me. Jake asked if Dad was mad again. I told him he was just tired. Tired, that was the word I used to mask my terror. The hours in the dark were long. Time seemed to stand still. Lily slept in my lap, and I prayed softly, "Lord, don't let my children inherit my fear." That was all I could say. When the light came back on, something inside me had already faded. The sparkle in my eyes, the hope in my voice, the faith in the promise of a happy home, it all seemed distant. I existed, but I didn't live. I breathed, but without air. Ryan started hiding the grocery card. He said I spent too much, even when I was only buying bread and milk. When I confronted him, he replied, "You should thank me for still supporting you." I smiled. Not because I agreed, but because I've learned that smiles prevent wars. Sometimes he slept facing the other side of the bed. Other times, he didn't even come home. I'd lie awake listening to the sound of cars outside, trying to guess if one of them was his. My heart pounded with every headlight that passed by the window. The bedroom, once a refuge, became a battlefield. The pillow held silent tears, the sheets, silent confessions. The bed, once sacred, became a stage for fear. I talked to God every night, but I felt he was far away. Until one day, through tears, I realized that maybe he had never left. Maybe he was just waiting for me to stop asking him to change Ryan and start asking him to change me. Jake started having nightmares. He would scream at night, saying a monster lived in the house. I would hug him and tell him monsters didn't exist. But we both knew they did. They just changed shape. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The pale face, the empty gaze, the frail body. The woman I saw there seemed like someone else. A survivor disguised as a wife. Ryan told me I was going crazy, that I was imagining things, that no one would believe me. And over time, I started to believe him. It was like he was rewriting my own mind. One day, I let the beans burn. Simple thing. But he exploded in fury. He threw the plate on the floor and yelled so loudly that Lily started to cry. I picked her up and stayed still. Fear taught my body not to react. After that, his words became invisible whips. "You are nothing. You are useless. Without me, you don't exist." I listened, and somehow, I began to believe. Faith was the only thing I still had. Small, but alive. A faint flame in a dark room. I prayed, even though I had no strength, and sometimes I felt a strange warmth in my chest, a distant memory of hope. One night the rain was pouring down. Ryan came home drunk, and I could smell it before he even walked in. He stumbled into the living room, looked at me with disdain, and said, "Look at you. Do you think anyone would love you but me?" I didn't answer. I just took a deep breath, trying not to break down. After he fell asleep, I sat on the kitchen floor and stared at the door. An ordinary door. But to me, it was a wall. What lay on the other side? Freedom or the unknown? I remembered my mother the night she told me, "Love is not a cross to bear alone." Now I understood. But understanding wasn't the same as acting. On good days, he treated me with affection. He cooked for me, laughed, kissed my forehead, and I clung to those moments like a child to a torn blanket. I thought it was proof of love. It was just the cycle starting over again. The children learned to be quiet when he arrived. An automatic silence fell over the house. Even the dog seemed to understand that he should hide. I started writing notes to God and hiding them in the Bible. "Show me the way," it said in one. "Give me courage," in another. It was my way of keeping from going crazy. Time passed, and the days repeated themselves like a broken record. The fear, the guilt, the excuses. Everything was on loop. Even the sound of the wind made me shiver. But there was something new stirring inside me. A spark. Small, shy, but alive. A voice that said, "You weren't born to live in fear." I tried to silence it, but it persisted. One afternoon, while cleaning the yard, I saw a bird trapped in a net. I struggled to free it, and when it finally flew away, I stared at the sky for minutes. It was like a sign. Night fell, and for the first time in a long time, I looked out the window and thought, maybe I can fly too. But fear still held me. It was like an invisible chain, light enough to feel bearable, strong enough to keep me grounded. In the following days, I began hiding small savings. Coins, old bills, pennies. It was my secret, my first step. Each hidden coin was an act of faith. A silent prayer saying, "I still believe in myself." I knew it wasn't time to run yet. But I also knew that when the time came, I would be ready. And the moment was approaching. I just didn't know it would come with the sound of a camera. And a video that would change everything. Summer has arrived hot in Dallas, and with it, a strange weight in the air. The windows of the house were always closed, but whispers escaped. Ryan was nervous, more so than usual. Any word I said would trigger an outburst. I could feel it. Something was about to happen. That night, the sky was orange, heavy with heat. I washed the dishes while Jake and Lily played on the porch. Ryan arrived early, his face tense and sweating. I knew, just by looking at him, that the storm was coming. It all started with a simple question. "Did you pay the water bill?" He replied sarcastically, and before I knew it, his tone escalated. The children froze. The noise of the argument grew louder, until the garage door became the stage for another scene I would never forget. He shoved me hard. I fell, trying to shield my face. I felt the cold cement beneath my hands and Jake's gaze piercing my heart. But something different happened that night. The world, for the first time, was watching. A new neighbor had installed a security camera pointing toward the street. And without anyone knowing, it captured everything. Every scream, every shove, every tear. The truth, which had been hidden for years, finally had a witness. The next morning, I woke to the sound of messages on my phone. The neighbors were in shock. "Emily, are you okay? We saw the video. Do you want me to call the police?" My whole body shook. The secret was out. Ryan found out minutes later. He screamed, punched the wall, and ran to get the car out. "They're going to pay for this," he said. But for the first time, the fear shifted. He was no longer the predator. He was the man naked in the face of his own shame. The recording spread through the condo group. People who had previously greeted us with smiles now looked away. The image of the exemplary husband had been shattered. And I felt something new. It wasn't relief yet. It was shock. It was the sound of freedom knocking on the door, and I didn't know if I could open it. I spent the day in silence, locked in my room with the children. Every phone notification was a reminder that the world finally knew. My pain, once invisible, now had proof. Cold, digital, undeniable. That night, Ryan didn't come home. The silence that remained was different. Not the tense silence of fear, but the silence of an emptiness that heralded change. When I closed my eyes, I saw the video in my mind. The push, the fall, the sound of Lily crying. And amidst the pain, a spark. Maybe God showed me what I needed to see to finally get out. In the following days, the neighborhood became a stage for curious gazes. I'd go out to get the mail and feel people whispering. Before, this kind of attention would have embarrassed me. But now, I had nothing left to hide. A lady from the other block, Mrs. Henderson, called me at the gate. "Honey, I've been through something like this too. You're not alone." His words were like a hug that spanned time. For the first time, someone saw the real Emily. Not the perfect wife, not the submissive woman, but the survivor rebuilding. Ryan started sending desperate messages. "Delete this video. You destroyed my life." I read them and thought, I didn't destroy anything. You did it with your own hands. He disappeared for a few days. And in that silence, something blossomed inside me. Courage. Timid, still trembling, but alive. I went to the children's room and saw them sleeping. Jake hugging a bear, Lily with her little finger in her mouth. My chest tightened and I whispered, "I promise I'll never let anyone make you cry again." The next day, I decided to leave home. Not definitely, not yet. But I did leave. I took the kids to a nearby park, Audubon Park, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the sun on my face without fear. As they played, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. It was as if the air had a different taste, the taste of something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. But the ride home was tense. The door was ajar. My heart raced. I walked in slowly, and there he was, sitting in the living room, cell phone in hand, eyes cold. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone." I stood still. He stepped closer, but something in me shifted. I didn't back away. I didn't cry. I didn't apologize. I just said, "It wasn't me who embarrassed you. It was you." His voice was firm, and he didn't seem to recognize the woman before him. That night, we slept under the same roof, but it was as if we lived in different worlds. He in a crumbling empire, I in a soul being reborn. The following Sunday, I knocked on Mrs. Henderson's door. She hugged me and said, "Honey, there's a women's support center in Fort Worth. You need to go." I returned home with that name engraved in my mind, Women's Resource Center, and one thing is certain, I would go. That same night, I knelt by my bed and prayed, "Lord, give me the strength to take this next step. I don't know how, but I know I can't stay here anymore." And what happened the next morning was the most unexpected answer God could give me. Because sometimes rescue doesn't come from the sky. It comes in the form of a police officer knocking on your door. I remember the sound of the doorbell that morning. A simple sound, but for me, it felt like fate itself knocking on the door. When I opened it, there was a police officer with a firm expression but kind eyes. "Miss Emily, we've received a call. Is everything okay here?" Ryan was still asleep in the room. My heart leaped into my throat. I nodded, unsure whether to say yes or ask for help. Then, without thinking, I looked at her and whispered, "Please take me away from here." She looked at me for a moment and understood. I didn't need to explain anything. A few minutes later, I was throwing clothes into the kids' backpacks, my heart pounding so loud it echoed off the walls. Ryan woke to the noise, confused, and the police officer held him tightly. "She's going out with the kids. Now." It was the first time someone had spoken for me. And that voice sounded like a miracle. Outside, the sun was beating down. Jake held my hand. Lily cried softly. I trembled, but not from fear, from release. Each step to the police car felt like a new beginning. In the back seat, I looked out the window and saw the house fading away. The house that had once been a dream, then a prison, was now just a soulless address. I said goodbye in silence, with tears that mixed pain and gratitude. The police officer's name was Officer Danielson. The way, she said little. She just drove, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror. You did the right thing, she said. And I wanted to believe her. We arrived at Women's Resource Center. In Fort Worth. The building was simple, but there was something there. An energy of welcome, of shelter, of mercy. A place where love didn't hurt. A social worker, Karen, greeted me at the door. Her eyes were soft and her smile calm. You're safe now, she said, taking my hand. That simple sentence made me fall apart. I sat on the reception sofa and cried. I cried for everything. For the lost years, for the broken promises, for the pent-up fear. But through my tears, I felt something new, relief. The children received toys, snacks, and a room full of drawings. Jake smiled. Lily ran into a volunteer's arms. And I realized, their laughter was the sound of hope returning home. Karen led me to a small room with 2 beds. You'll sleep here tonight, she said. And as I closed the door, I looked around and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. In that simple bed, I slept as if the sky itself were rocking me. I woke to the sound of birds, and for a moment, I forgot the past. Light streamed in through the window as if God were saying, I never left you. At breakfast, other women sat with me. Each with a different story, each with different scars. But there was something common in all their faces, the strength of survivors. One of them, called Monica, told me, in the beginning, we just want to survive. Then, we learn to live again. Those words stuck with me. The next few days were strange. I still watched the clock, waiting for Ryan to arrive. I was still startled by sudden noises. But little by little, the fear began to fade. Jake drew a colorful house and said, This is our new home, Mommy. And when I looked, I saw he'd drawn the sun smiling. It was a sign. I started attending shelter meetings. Women shared their stories, and I realized I wasn't alone. The shared pain became lighter. Sometimes, during prayers, I would cry silently. I felt God's presence closer than ever. Not in rehearsed words, but in the simple act of being alive. Karen helped me fill out the legal paperwork. Restraining orders, protection orders, fresh start programs. Each signature was a liberation. In the midst of all this, one of her phrases stuck with me. You are not what he said you were. I repeated that phrase to myself dozens of times until I believed it. The nights were still difficult. Sometimes I dreamed of screams, doors slamming, the sound of breaking glass. But when I woke, the silence no longer hurt. It was the sound of healing beginning. Little by little, I began to look at myself in the mirror again. My face still showed weariness, but my eyes had a new glow. The glow of someone who survived hell and can still love. The children made friends, learned songs, and I found myself smiling for simple reasons. The smell of coffee, the sound of laughter, the wind in the trees. Little things I hadn't even noticed before. One morning, Karen called me in for a chat. Emily, have you thought about what you want to do from now on? I remained silent. For the first time, life was asking me this, and I didn't have a ready answer. I spent the rest of the day thinking. And that night, I knelt by my bed like I did as a child and said, Lord, if you've brought me this far, show me what to do now. It was at that moment that I felt something inside me shift. As if the pain had transformed into purpose. I looked at the sleeping children and realized, I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to rebuild. Show Jake and Lily that life doesn't end when love hurts. And it was there, in that shelter, surrounded by strong women and reborn stories, that I made a new promise, no longer to be a good wife, but to be a free woman. There was still much to come, difficult nights, doubts, fears. But one thing was certain, the Emily who climbed into that police car would never exist again. Because the woman who walked through the shelter door, I would never again accept living without light. Starting from scratch is scary. At the shelter they told me, one step at a time. But no one tells you how much that first step hurts. It's the weight of everything you've left behind, mixed with the fear of what you don't yet know. Even so, one day, I simply stood up and said, no more waiting. With the help of Karen, I got a small job cleaning offices in Fort Worth. The salary was minimal, but the first paycheck felt like a trophy. It was proof that I could, perhaps for the first time in years, support myself. She woke before the sun. She made coffee, dressed the kids, and caught 2 buses to work. Her body ached, her eyes burned, but her heart had a new rhythm. Every sweep, every floor cleaned, every task completed was a reminder, you are alive. My shelter colleagues called me the quiet one, but it wasn't silence, it was focus. While they rested, I studied. I took free online courses, read about safety, first aid, psychology. I wanted to understand fear, so I would never live with it again. One day, Karen showed me a pamphlet for a course in fire safety training. Maybe you'll like this, Emily, she said. I looked at the paper and felt butterflies in my stomach. Saving lives. The opposite of what I'd experienced. I signed up with trepidation, but I went. On the first day, I was shaking holding my helmet. The instructor, Captain Brooks, realized and said, everyone is afraid at first. The important thing is what you do with it. Those words stayed with me. I learned about fire, about endurance, about running toward danger when everyone else is running away. And I realized, I'd been doing this for years, only indoors. Now I was learning to do it differently, by choice, not desperation. The days were long. Work, study, and childcare. Sometimes I fell asleep sitting up. But every time I looked at Jake and Lily, I remembered why. Freedom came at a price, and I was willing to pay it. The shelter helped me rent a small apartment. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, and a tiny kitchen. The walls were peeling, but the place smelled like a new beginning. Jake said, "Mommy, this house looks happy." I agreed. I decorated the house with artificial flowers and handwritten verses. On the living room mirror, I taped a note, "You are not what he said you are." Every morning, I read it out loud until I believed it. The classes were tough. Heavy workloads, resistance training, intense simulations. There were times when I wanted to give up. But whenever I thought about it, I remembered the girl who survived the nights without light, and kept going. Captain Brooks called me one day and said, "You've got a talent for this, Emily. Don't give up." It was the first time anyone had truly believed in me. Over time, I began to make friends. Good, hardworking people, full of stories too. I discovered that everyone carries a fire inside. Some let it consume them, others learn to use it to illuminate. Sometimes, coming home at night, I would look at the city's reflection in the puddles and think, who would have thought I would be here after all this? Jake started playing soccer at school. Lily learned to draw hearts. Their joy was my fuel. Every achievement I had was theirs, too. The first day I drove a fire truck, I cried. Not out of fear but out of pride. That steering wheel represented every decision that had brought me to this point. The hands that once trembled with fear now held courage. There were days when my body told me to stop, but my heart told me to keep going. And it was that heart, bruised but resilient, that kept me going. One Sunday, I returned to church. I sat in the last pew, unnoticed. When the choir sang Amazing Grace, the tears came. Not of sadness, but of gratitude. On the way out, a lady stopped me. "Honey, I see God in your eyes." I smiled and thought, maybe he was always here, even when I thought I was alone. Over time, I got my first salary as firefighter trainee. I bought a small apple pie to celebrate with the kids. Jake said a prayer before eating. Thank you, God, that mom is brave. That night, I lay watching them sleep. I thought about everything I'd experienced, and a certainty struck me. The pain had broken me, but God remade me into strength. The apartment was still small, money was still tight, but the heart, it was full. I started writing down my dreams in a new notebook. One of them, studying psychology. I wanted to understand the wounds of the soul, to heal other women like me. Karen told me, "You're already an inspiration, Emily. Sometimes a life's testimony speaks louder than any diploma." Still, I wanted more. Not out of vanity but out of purpose. I wanted to turn pain into a mission. Fire taught me something profound. Burning is not the end, it is the beginning of something new. And it was in this spirit that I decided to continue studying, working, and serving. Because, for the first time, I wasn't running away from anything. I was running towards life. And what I didn't know was that a simple radio sound, on an ordinary afternoon, would change my story again. It was on an ordinary afternoon, one of those when life seems to just go on as it should, that something extraordinary happened. I was cleaning the house, the radio tuned to the local radio station, Dallas, and suddenly a song started playing that I had never heard before. The singer's voice was sweet, firm, and seemed to speak directly to me. The words said, "I've still got a lot of fight left in me." I stopped what I was doing. The cloth fell from my hand. The whole world seemed to stop with it. For a moment, I forgot the past, the fear, the exhaustion. I felt my chest open, and tears began to flow without me even realizing it. They weren't tears of pain, they were tears of recognition. It was as if someone had translated my soul into melody. I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, and let the music wash over me. Each verse was a reminder of all I'd survived, each note a whisper from God saying, "I have raised you up, daughter." The kids were in the living room. Jake looked at me and asked, "Mommy, why are you crying?" And I replied with a smile, "Because that song just reminded me of who I am." The chorus repeated itself, and I began to sing along, half voiceless, half sobbing. This is my fight song, take back my life song. It was as if each word glued back together the pieces that fear had ripped from me. After the song ended, the silence was different. It was a good silence, full of peace. That night, I looked up the song on YouTube. I discovered it was called Fight Song, of Rachel Platten. I left it on replay for hours, until I memorized every word. I started listening to it every morning before work. It was my hymn, my modern prayer, the soundtrack to my rebirth. Jake learned the chorus and sang along with me in the car, clapping his hands off beat. Lily laughed, making up lyrics. And suddenly I realized, our house was filled with sound again. It was no longer the sound of fear, it was the sound of life returning. Sometimes I would close my eyes and imagine God smiling, saying, "See, Emily? I gave you back your music." At work, I started humming softly between shifts. My coworkers would look at me and say, "Girl, you have a new glow." I'd reply, "It's the light of someone who started believing again." There was a morning when I arrived early and saw the sun rising behind the buildings. It seemed like the whole sky was singing with me. I went back to writing in my notebook. Only now, instead of sad outbursts, they were plans. Buy a car. Go to college. Help other women. Even the Bible, once stained with tears, was now filled with notes in colored pens. I replaced the questions with gratitude. The sound of the music still echoed in my mind even when the radio was off. It was like an invisible reminder. Life can still be beautiful. One afternoon, during lunch at the shelter, Karen called me over. "There's a lady here who wants to give a motivational talk. I think you should come." I went, with no expectations. The speaker was a tall, firm-voiced woman named Angela Ross. And she began by saying, "I'm alive because someone helped me when I thought I was worthless." I felt every word as if it were my own. After the talk, I went up to her and told her a little about my story. She took my hands and said, "One day, you too will inspire someone." I smiled, not knowing that this prophecy would come true. That night, I put on Fight Song again and wrote in my journal, "Today, I felt God looking at me through a song." Jake came to me and asked to sleep with me. When he lay down, he said, "Mommy, now Daddy can't hurt you anymore, right?" I took a deep breath and replied, "No, honey. Now no one can." After he fell asleep, I stared at the ceiling. I thought about everything. The pain, the escape, the faith, the fire, and now, the song. Everything seemed to connect, as if each step had prepared me for this moment. I realized that I wasn't just surviving. I was living. The neighbors in the new building recognized me by my smile. At work, I was already training new employees. Little by little, my life was beginning to take shape. And every time the doubt crept back in, I'd play the song. It was my reminder that the war wasn't over, but I was winning. One day, Lily drew a paper full of hearts and wrote, "Mommy, you are brave." I tucked that paper into my Bible, among the Psalms, where before I'd only kept requests. Now, I kept promises. God gave me back my sound, my courage and my laughter. And the most beautiful thing is that, for the first time, I could believe that my story could help other women. I didn't know how or when, but a new purpose was born within me, one that would lead me to change lives, just as mine had been changed. And so it was, with my heart at peace and my eyes focused on the future, that the next part of my journey began, restoring hope to those who have lost their voice. Today, when I open my eyes and see the sun rising over Dallas, I feel a peace I never imagined possible. The same sun that once illuminated my tears now warms my purpose. I no longer run from mornings. I celebrate them. The kids have grown up a bit. Jake now understands what we're going through, and Lily speaks about me with pride. My mom is a firefighter and helps other women. Every time I hear that, my heart fills with something that goes beyond happiness. It's redemption. After years of trying to survive, I now live to serve. I work part-time as a firefighter, and the rest of the time I volunteer with a support group for abused women. We call the project Network of Hope. The first time I walked into the meeting room, I smelled the same scent as the Fort Worth shelter, fresh coffee and hope. There were women, young and old, black and white, and immigrants. All different, but united by the same pain, and the same strength. I sat at the front and told my story. I didn't hide my tears. I spoke of fear, guilt, and shame. And when I finished, the silence in the room was profound, the kind of silence that heals. A woman raised her hand and asked, "How did you get out?" I replied with what I've learned from life. I asked for help. And then I believed I deserved it. In the end, they all embraced. Those hands trembling with fear were the same ones that now held hope. And I understood. This was why God had let me live. The weeks passed, and the group grew. We received donations, clothing, food, even a small office. Sometimes I think that love also multiplies when it's shared. I began giving talks at schools, churches, and community centers. I spoke about empathy, faith, and starting over. I always ended by saying, "No woman should have to be strong alone." Jake, now a teenager, always helps me put together the donation boxes. He says he loves seeing his mother's smile. "It's like seeing you smile again, Mommy." These words remind me of who I fought to be. Lily loves to draw. She made a mural in the group's office, a huge rainbow with the phrase, "God heals hearts." Every time I look at that drawing, I feel like crying. Sometimes at night, I get messages from women I don't know saying, "Emily, I saw your talk. You gave me the courage to come out." And in those moments, I realize the cycle has finally been broken. The pain that once silenced me now gives voice to others. A network of hope. It started small, but soon became a refuge. Women arrive broken, and leave with a sparkle in their eyes. The same sparkle that one day returned to mine. During meetings, We read biblical passages about forgiveness and strength. I always say, God doesn't want you to suffer to prove His love. He wants you to live to witness His love. There's something divine about seeing someone reborn. It's like watching a flower blossom from concrete. One day, Karen, that same social worker from the shelter, came to visit me. When she saw me speaking in front of the women, she cried, "I knew you would be a light." I hugged her and said, "You were the first person who believed in me. Now it's my turn to believe in others." During an event, a journalist asked me, "What would you say to 16-year-old Emily, the one who believed in love above all else?" I thought for a moment and replied, "I would tell her to love, yes, but without losing herself. Because true love never demands silence." After the interview, I sat in the car and watched the sunset. I thought about Ryan. Not with hate, not with longing, but with forgiveness. Not because he deserved it, but because I deserved to move on in peace. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it does erase the power the past has over you. Today, my faith is my guiding light. I still pray every morning, but now my prayers are different. Before, I asked God to save me. Now, I just thank Him for teaching me how to walk. In my free time, I study psychology at night. I want to train to help women emotionally, not just physically. I want to be the voice that says, "You are not alone." Children sometimes ask, "Mommy, are you still afraid?" I answer, "No, my loves." My fear disappeared when I discovered that faith is stronger. On Sundays, we like to have picnics at White Rock Lake. We sit on the grass, with sandwiches and laughter. And as the wind blows, I think, this is why God gave me life back, to see the sun, to laugh, to love without fear. Sometimes I look up to the sky and whisper, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you for showing me that ruins can also bloom." And that's how I end every meeting of the Network of Hope. I tell women, you don't have to be perfect to start over. You just have to believe you deserve it. They always applaud, cry, hug each other. And so do I. Because each story saves a little of mine. Today, when I look back, I see not a tragedy, but a mission. I'm not just Emily anymore. I'm living proof that God turns pain into destiny. And as the Dallas sun sets on the horizon, I think of the thousands of women still in the dark. And I say the same prayer every day. Lord, guide my steps so that I can be someone's shelter, just as you once were mine. You know, sometimes I think about everything I've been through, the screams, the fear, the tears, the silence, and I realize that every moment, no matter how painful, has brought me here. And here, finally, there is peace. There is light. But there's also something bigger. Purpose. Because survival wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a mission. Today, when I look back, I don't just see scars. I see marks of victory. Every wound is a reminder that God never abandoned me, even when I thought He was silent. And maybe you, who are listening now, have also experienced nights without light. Maybe your slap came in another form, a word, a betrayal, a loss. But let me tell you something. What hurt you does not define who you are. What defines you is what you do after the pain. It's the step you take, even when you're trembling. It's the yes you say to God when everything inside you wants to give up. You are not alone. There's a whole network of hope waiting for you, made up of people who have fallen, but chose to get back up. Maybe today is your day to open the door to the invisible shelter you've been hiding in. To take a deep breath and say, "Lord, take me out." And when you do, you'll realize, the world is still beautiful. The sun still rises. True love still exists, the kind that comes from above, pure, without hurt. Because God didn't create you to live in fear. He created you to live with purpose. So, I ask you, have you ever felt like love hurt you more than it healed you? Have you ever looked in the mirror and not recognized the woman you became? What would you do if you knew that God still has beautiful plans for you? Think about it. Breathe. Pray. And allow yourself to start over. Before I finish, I want to pray for you. Lord, Bless every woman who hears this story. May she feel your love where there was once fear. May your spirit renew her strength and show her that there is always a new dawn. Amen. And if this story touched your heart, if you believe that God's love still transforms lives, like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This way, you help this message reach more hearts that need to hear that it's never too late to start over. Because, in the end, the real miracle is not surviving. It is live again, with faith, with courage and with hope.